Welcome to the Jewish Diasporist, a podcast exploring the political, social, and cultural implications of life in diaspora. We are your hosts, Ben Yanowitz
and Zach. In this episode, we spoke with three organizers of the United Jewish People's Order, UJPO for short. We apologize that we couldn't get out an April Fool's/anniversary episode this time. You'll all have to wait another year for my Game of Thrones Season 8 remake fanfic.
I'm excited for that. This episode's guests include Serena, UJPO's executive director, David, one of their longtime cultural programming developers, and Shale, UJPO's community and office manager, who grew up as part of the organization.
UJPO is a secular and socialist Jewish fraternal organization largely based in Toronto, which emerged from a pro-communist split in the Canadian Workers' Circle in the 1920s. As we are publishing this, the organization is actually celebrating its centennial.
For those of you who don't know, that means 100 years.
Exactly. We have previously interviewed guests based in Canada, even in Toronto, but this is actually the first Canadian organization we've spoken with. To honor their culture, we would like to apologize for taking so long to go about it.
Sorry, eh? Before we get into this conversation, we want to remind you that we continue to produce this show because of what we know it adds to the wider conversation on the Jewish left. If you like what we're doing here, please share this with others who might be interested. And if you aren't already, follow us on Instagram at the Jewish Diasporist Pod, subscribe to our shared YouTube channel, the Hamotzi Network, and consider making a monthly or annual contribution through our Patreon. All of these links can be found in the description.
We hope you enjoy this conversation.
We are beautiful people, though our hearts are broken. We sing for justice and wholeness.
Okay. Serena, David, Shale, it's really, really lovely to finally get the chance to sit down with you guys. We're going to start with a question we always ask, which is really what brought you to get involved with the work you're involved with? So what parts of your personal and family history have led to you getting involved with the United Jewish People's Order? And then also, what practically led you to joining this organization?
I was raised by a queer Jewish radical lefty, my mother, Naomi. She was associated with the United Jewish People's Order for decades, and it just seemed sort of a natural fit. But my connection was actually through music, not politics. The executive director in the 1990s hired me to sing at events. I'm a professional musician and actually studied to be a cantor, but became really uninterested in religion and being a kind of religious figure. But I can sing and have always been interested in Jewish music and studied Yiddish and other things. And it seems sort of a natural thing. So at a pretty young age, I was asked to sing at United Jewish People's Order events. So that was my entrance into the organization professionally. And at one point, you'll hear talk of our summer camp, Camp Nivelt. I had a cabin there briefly. Both my kids grew up in the shula that we have, the Morris and Cheshire schools. So I have been ensconced in the community for decades.
It's helpful when you're just born into the organization. Yeah, it's a great answer.
Shale's really born into the organization, literally. So I think maybe Shale should go next.
Well, yeah, not quite born into, but I have been in the community of UJPO, the United Jewish People's Order, since I was a child, since I was around 12 years old. My family rented a cabin at Camp Nivelt, which is our summer cottage community, 100 years old. Used to be a kids camp at one point and then became a family camp with little tents and cottages, like tiny shack, one room cottages, is now just, it's a family camp, and with people own the little cottages and UJPO own the land. And it's just 45 minutes outside of Toronto. It's not really in the countryside anymore. It's more like in a suburb, but it's in this beautiful forested area by the Credit River. So I attended Nivelt in the summer of 2008, when there was this big community play, like sort of a big play that involved the whole Nijvelt community coming together. It was about the history of Nijvelt and the history of the women that founded Camp Nijvelt, who were also involved in the founding of the United Jewish People's Order. So, and they were like women who were factory workers who wanted a place for their kids to go for the summer, and they were leftists, labor activists, and communists, and they founded the camp. So we did, and one of them she had written a memoir about her childhood in a Soviet children's commune. So the kids of Nijvelt sort of reenacted the children's commune for a week, and we lived on our own, sort of, in the main building at camp, and made food, and I don't know, read the Communist Manifesto. And then some artists who were members of Camp Nijvelt had done all these interviews over the course of some years with older members of the community about the history of Nijvelt, and through those interviews and a lot of amazing work by our historians, and then this reenactment of the children's commune, we created this big community play that was about the history of Nijvelt, but also somewhat about the history of UJPO as well, because they're totally connected. And it was really transformative for me, and that's like sort of where I started learning about Yiddish and leftist Jewish culture in Canada and around the world, and all of the music and language and literature and culture are associated with that. And I stayed really interested in that for my whole life and stayed involved with UJPO. And eventually I learned Yiddish and did a bunch of stuff with that. And then I got a job at UJPO in 2022. 2022, is that right? And yeah, and it's always been my dream to like actually work and get paid to do leftist Jewish community organizing, community work, and Yiddish related stuff. So that's me. Long story short. Serena.
I love it when Shale references that blueprint of that play and reading the Communist Manifesto in the fields of Camp Nijvelt and how formative that was. It's like one of my favorite stories. True stories. I came to this organization, well, okay, I guess I should start by saying I'm a first generation Canadian. So my parents and my grandparents, who all immigrated to Canada, tried to get into the States, couldn't, came to Montreal instead, were definitely like the Ashkenazi shtetl pogromed Jews that were running for their lives. And they came over after the war. They had their own survival stories. So when they came here, those who made it out, they were very, very proud assimilists. They wanted to kind of leave their Jewishness behind. But at the same time, had a pride in a socialist politic. So I was very lucky that I had my grandmother, Polish grandmother, from Vilna, which was Poland at the time, was a card-carrying Bundist. So I had some of this lore and some of this mythology in Canada, right? Like it carried over and it came through. So fast forward to the same executive director that David referenced, Maxine Hermelin, also hired me to be an educator in the 1990s at the Morris Winchevsky School. And that was my entry. And I was like, oh my God, it's like Yiddishist, shtetlist, Bundist, my people, here in Canada. And it was enlightening for me. And, whereas the generation above me, my parents and my grandparents, they were less interested. But I was like, a sponge for it and really hungry for that. And there is some Venn diagram overlap, I think, of a assimilist mentality with a diasporic mentality too. And I think I'm part of the wave of that's like, no, I'm more diasporist and I'm more trying to like reclaim some of my Jewishness where they were trying to like shed it at that time of trauma. So I came in through the Morsinchevsky schools as an educator, and I found this, politically left Bundist infused, but I wouldn't say that the Bund was a central character to the politics of UJPO, but it's involved. Um, and it was definitely like curious for me. And then remained involved in the community on and off. Since the 90s when I would be in Toronto or not, because I personally moved around so much until coming back to Toronto. And then this position let itself be known and I went for it. I don't know. I didn't think I would go for it. It was so funny because I knew that the position of executive director was open at the UJPO. And because I care so much about UJPO and had for years, I was watching. I'm like, who's the next ED going to be? Who is it going to be? And it was sort of through internal conversations and an invitation for me to consider applying that's sort of what led me there. It wasn't even my own idea to apply, but yeah, and that was in 2022 in the fall. So since then, and now it's my whole life and my whole world. And even when we want a break, we don't get one, but I say that lovingly.
It's nice getting to the point when an organization that is your whole world is also able to pay your bills. I could relate to that one day, maybe. You've all answered this question sort of in a similar way that I was interested in finding out, which is we haven't had many Canadians, or at least I don't think we've had maybe any Canadian Jewish interviewees on our podcast in almost 3 years, which is, I don't know if that's telling or not, but or just a coincidence. But one of the things that does interest me is, to what extent do you feel yourself connected with this stereotype of what Canadians are perceived from the outside, or at least with these like cultural signifiers that come from? So, I mean, like, I was thinking before if I might be able to like intertwine these all into one sentence, but what are the stereotypes that we associate with Canadians, like maple syrup, ice hockey, being on a moose in an RCMP uniform, I guess. I mean, there's obviously
saying
like
sorry, saying A is a big one.
A boot. Sorry, this is just turning into an excuse to say a lot of things. Obviously, like, it's also true, and we can get into like the other side, that like the stereotype of just like Canada being this like nicer place. There's a lot of bad things that Canadian government has done, especially to the First Nations and so on. But but so not to like invisibilize that, not in the slightest. But to what extent do you feel attached to these like outside, or at least stereotypical Canadian cultural signifiers? To what extent do you feel that these like represent part of your identity, both in like the general sense, and then also hopefully we'll be able to get into like the internal linguistic questions within Canada? How do these resonate for you in the way that outsiders perceive Canada as a whole?
I mean, I can just make the joke that like to be a Canadian Jew is to put like maple syrup on your latkes or in your charoset or something.
I think we're pushed a bit too far.
I don't think that up until quite recent, there's like, we're having a bit of a surge of nationalism right now, but I would say like Jews, it doesn't really include Jews that much, like those stereotypes, and I think I think that was sort of accepted gladly by Jews of the past, especially. Like, I think that a big part of our history at UJPO is a relationship with other leftist, communist, Jewish organizations around the world, and like a real internationalism. I think also the three of us, I mean, Serena and David can speak for themselves as well, are also like very involved in a lot of organizing and activist work, which sort of every day we're basically just sad about everything that Canada represents and does. Um, so I don't think there's much identifying with it or any stereotypes around it. It's and yeah, I think like I know there's a sort of the most real to me in my life Canadian stereotype is this idea of Canada as like a peacekeeping nation. And I know like when my parents were growing up, my parents were born in the early 1960s, and they completely drank that Kool-Aid and believed that, and it was really not, they were totally leftist, but it was still part of the belief system that Canada was this is this really amazing, safe, wonderful peacekeeping nation, and Pierre Trudeau is this like visionary leader who, whatever. And I think that bit of propaganda is really strong, and but we do fight against that, I think, idea, because we know it's not true, and or at least we fight to make it for real true instead of just pretend true.
There's a smugness to Canadians. We're better than the United States. I think that we are a racist, genocidal country, just maybe with more of a polite British style veneer, and that permeates our political stances. And Shale made reference to this just recent, like basically this year, there's been this upsurge of, it's called elbows up. There's this anti-Americanism that's set in. The person who became our prime minister did so very much with an kind of, let's keep our national identity, we're anti-Trump, whatever it is, sort of contrast with Trumpian American politics. I think one thing that I do appreciate about Canada, if there's anything, is there has been less, for whatever reason, of this kind of rampant patriotism and centralized nationalism. We do have less of that than the United States. Like, and if it always feels forced and fake to me if people are like waving Canadian flags around. And so that's one good thing. I don't know. Do you
Yeah,
guys?
like we don't really have a MAGA equivalent, do we?
Well, we have right wing parties and right wing people.
Yeah, but the right wing people and parties don't have a slogan quite like or have a real quick, easy, fast way to identify that like the Americans do or something.
There's definitely less of like a strong mythology to fall back on, so that creates a bit more space.
I think it's also interesting, something that has been noted from the outside, that there is a little bit of a brain drain that exists when it comes to Canadian right-wing political influences and figures, that as soon as they get some sort of prominence within Canada, they move to America and engage with that market just because it's so much larger, right? Whenever you think, like, Jordan Peterson is one example of that, right? Like, he became famous in Canada, and as soon as he got known, like, there's just so much, there's such a more like a media industrial complex, political machinery connected with that, at least for the Anglophone speakers.
Yeah.
Regionalism of Canada is very important as well. We have, partly because, I mean, it's sort of trite to say this, but the geography of Canada is such that our much smaller population is really spread out, and it's far away. There's a feeling, and even though, for example, Ontario isn't that far technically from Quebec, it really is in many ways, two different worlds. And so there's, and then, British Columbia on the west and our East Coast, there isn't the same sort of homogenous feeling that I get from the United States. Of course, there's regionalism in the United States, but there's that national character that's trumpeted all the time. I don't think we have that to quite the same extent here. And is that to be celebrated? I don't know, because we do have these very, very separate entities. And I know you're going to get to French language and French Canadian history, and I mean,
There
we've
is one
relegated.
thing to celebrate, though. The one thing, which is that in our Camp Nival co-chair of the committee at Camp Nival, you guys mentioned hockey. She was the casting agent for Heated Rivalry. So
Whoa.
we have that point of pride
Whoa.
at
Whoa.
UJPO.
Hey, you
I hope you've
know,
all seen that Canadian television, right? Like that
I think we
CanCon
should end the
coming in.
interview now. That's a perfect place to end the interview.
oh my goodness.
UJPO created
Heated
heated rivalry.
rivalry. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I do want us to move a little bit back to UJPO because this year you're celebrating the centennial of this organization that you guys are part of and leadership of. And that's a pretty big deal. I mean, 100 years, not a lot of organizations on the Jewish left have lasted 100 years. I'm sure we could think of some if we took the time, but honestly, there's really not that many. I was really curious to hear about your guys' view, how you as an organization understand your guys' history, as well as the history of those groups. You mentioned Camp Nivelt, you mentioned the Winchevsky School. Really curious to know more about this history, as well as, like, as I understand it, the UJPO was founded as a Jewish fraternal organization similar to the Arbeiter Ring or Workers' Circle. So I was curious if you could tell us a little bit about how UJPO came to become what it is, as well as how the current shape of the organization has come into being.
I don't know what weird this like narrative has developed that I know the history like, way better. I'm just like, I've read our Wikipedia page. Like, I don't know.
You're the resident nerd historian, apparently.
I'm really, really not. We do actually have a real resident historian who wrote a whole book about the Jewish left in Canada, Esther Ryder. She's amazing and she knows everything.
Wait,
We will
her
mail
name
you
is
this
Ryder?
book.
Yeah, Esther Ryder, like Reiter, right?
So she could either be a motorcycle mama or an author. depending
Yeah,
on your-
Esther Ryder. Yeah.
We will include a link to
we
that.
can mail you this book.
It's a
Yeah,
great book, incredible.
Yeah.
It's called A Future Without Hate or Need, and it's sort of a bit the untold story of like what was going on in Canada with the Jewish left when the story's a bit more told for the States, and she
Yeah.
did amazing research over decades, and yeah, it started out as the worker circle in Toronto, and then there was a split, basically faction of the worker circle that were pro Bolshevik, supporting the Russian Revolution. They were kind of kicked out / left the workers circle, and started their own organization. And it was at first it was women, and then the men followed, and that organization was just kind of like a more radical version of the workers circle, but it was still what was then called a fraternal organization, and it was like a mutual benefit society in a lot of ways. So there's cemetery lands, a credit union. I don't know exactly when all of these parts like became part of it, but credit union, cemetery lands, our shula, which at a certain point I believe was entirely in Yiddish. It was Yiddish school,
And it was every day.
for kids. And
Was
it
that like
every day.
that was like a day school then? So
Yeah.
like a
Was it a day
full-time?
school or was it like an after school?
I don't know, but it was,
Every day.
it was certainly every day. It was much more of
Yeah.
But it was in the summer once there wasn't school, right?
No.
No, the shula was every day. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was like an everyday. I think it was an after school thing. We should know this better.
I
But
thought it was only in the summer. Look at what we're learning. Okay.
Competing historical narratives.
so it was all of these, and then there was also the Toronto Jewish Folk Choir, which was this amazing choir that sang in Yiddish, and lots of cultural elements, and all of that was within this sort of. It was called the Jewish Labor League, I think, or the Labor League Mutual Benefit Society or something like that. So that, and we still have our cemetery lands. We are no longer a credit union, but we still have our school and our cemetery lands and our camp, Nivelt. So that's the origin of UJPO. The other chapters, the non-Toronto chapters, like I feel like I'm less clear on when those. But there was a Montreal chapter. There's a chapter in Winnipeg still today, and we're hopeful for a chapter in Montreal, and we have a historic chapter in Montreal. There was a chapter in Montreal which got shuttered during like McCarthyism. They got padlocked and all their stuff taken away. That's sort of the founding era. I can't really remember what the other questions were.
I guess kind of a follow-up question on that. When I like look at the history of these Jewish fraternal organizations. You have the Workers' Circle, you have the UJPO, you have another one called the International Workers Order. The International Workers Order in particular sounds very similar to UJPO. It was in the US. It also had summer camp. It also provided insurance and things like that. But they were similarly to your Montreal branch, they were shuttered by McCarthyism in the United States. I guess I'm wondering, do you know why only one chapter was shuttered, while in other cases McCarthyism was very harsh in shutting down any pro-communist organization?
I think that's because it was the only chapter at the time that had assets. So we're talking about the 50s. And so there were buildings and there was material, right? There was bricks and mortar and there were material files. And when we first started, there's in a building that we built here in Toronto from the ground up after a giant capital campaign in 1960. We had, when we were still credit union too, so there was like a bank vault and some interesting features. We had this ancient safe that somehow got into the building at the time that we couldn't open because I think there were some speculations of what the code was, but I actually think that the internal mechanisms had broken. And so we literally couldn't open it. And we finally succumbed to prying it open, like getting somebody to break in, like with, all of like the drama of, blowtorches and it was incredible. It smelled terrible. It was incredible. And when we got in, there was like this one envelope that said, I mean, there were many interesting things, but one of the things was an envelope that basically said burn after reading. And it had like a history of UJPO appearing in RCMP files around that same time that we were under watch as a communist organization, and all of the other organizations too that were similarly being surveilled and targeted the way we were.
I think it also has to do with the Quebec government being more right wing probably at the time. Yeah, yeah.
What I mentioned before about the extreme regionalism of Canada is extremely important because specific to Quebec was this extremely anti-communist active government. I mean, it was the whole country's anti-communist, but sorry to interrupt. But Quebec specifically was intense
and anti-Semitic as well. And so yeah, like Jews. Obviously, this is true about the States too, but like Jews more often targeted. And so, yeah, I think it's related to that because we would have had some bricks and mortar before Cranbrook, right? Like we would have been.
That's true. I guess.
On Brunswick and
we
Christie,
had another
Christie,
place.
yeah.
But yeah, so I think it's like related to that kind of a slightly more of a witch hunt happening in Quebec than in Ontario. But
all those good things.
Yeah, we were definitely on an RCMP watch list, and I think we still are.
But in a good way.
Yeah, we're proud about it.
I think one of the things, there's two things that I would like to focus on here. The first one I think is a specific kind of way of doing politics, which, whether it comes to you from looking at the history of the Bund or UJPO or various non-Jewish organizations, the idea that yes, you are a political movement, a political party, and that might entail voting and campaigning in elections, national, regional, whatever. But that there are also so many ways in which a bunch of people together can not just build community in the sense of build friendship, but in a sense of building institutions and mechanisms for protecting and developing these institutions that are really, really powerful, whether we're talking about cooperatives or credit unions or summer camps or night schools. These are all so inspirational, I think, to us, because in a lot of ways they do not exist today in the kind of the communal organizing, at least not nearly to the same extent. Obviously, a lot of groups do that. A lot of groups do try to do that. Same goes with physical spaces. I think I've mentioned this already once or twice on the podcast before, but when you look at memoirs of Bundists in interwar Warsaw, one of the things that I find the most inspirational is that like they had like so many addresses and physical locations. Like the Central Committee met here, the soup kitchen was here, like our sports organization met at this stadium. It's like address, and then you compare it to even cities with very big Jewish communities and a seemingly large Jewish movement ecosystem. I always pick on London with this because that's the one that I have the most experience with. That's London in the UK. I have to disambiguate because I know there's a London in Canada as well. But for this episode specifically, but in London, right, there isn't that kind of space. There isn't like that kind of infrastructure. I know of some people now that are doing a little bit of work in that regard, but it's nowhere near like what would be needed in order to really develop and make these spaces valuable and break out of a certain bubble, maybe. And the second thing also I wanted to say is that when you develop these kinds of ways of getting involved, I think it inevitably forces you, at least to a certain extent, towards a level of plurality. When you don't spend your whole time thinking of like on ideology, when you see how, you know, even the tiniest of differences can turn into, you know, the biggest of fights and arguments, but you focus on something practical, like, you know, setting up a school or a summer camp or whatever, that allows for people, you know, who might otherwise be at odds with each other, with working together. Also, something that I think is relevant to ask as because you come from this heritage as a group that split off from the workers' circle, like to what extent do you still identify with this heritage and still consider it to be one of your own, at the same time also claiming heritage in connection to other forms of the or tendencies or whatever you want to call it, movements of the Jewish left, including the Bund, which you've mentioned, because you know a while ago that would have been sort of a very different sort of conversation, but now it's probably more open, right?
I'm going to start, and then maybe it'll trigger something in Shale and David. I think everything that you've said kind of boils down to and points to mutual aid. Mutual aid as a very consistent value system has carried us through all of the eras. And so political conditions might change, our political nuance might change, but the value of aid over charity is something that really stays consistent. And in that respect, I think we very much still resonate with our early days. And I think like that is a point of sort of like radical pride that set us apart from the Arbiter Ring too, right? And I think that's mixed up in there. That's what's coming up for me from your analysis and your questions. What about you guys?
Yeah, I think that is a huge part of how we define ourselves and define our lane in our community today of who we are. And we are not a one issue like political organization. We are a community organization, but we are political, and we've always been political. But we also are more than that, and we think that's really important. We are an institution, and that happened because people came together, and with very little resources, they were working class people, created a mutual benefit society, which was, you know, so they could have reasonable costs to bury their family members, and you know, have and we always hear from folks who have been around a long time that in the mid-century, when the organization was booming, it was like everyone's whole life happened at UJPO. Mm-hmm. And it was summertime at Camp Niveld, and then it was in the city during the winter, and it was the choir, and then all of the things that it took to run that. Everyone was just, you know, you go to the board meeting and all of your closest friends and family were also there, and it was the women and the men quite equally doing a lot of that work. And I think we really see ourselves now, even though we are now living at a time when that is harder to really do for real because of living in late capitalism. It's just difficult to really have a community where you're like, we are providing for each other's basic needs by sharing resources. We're really inspired by that from our history, and we try to do that and be a mutual benefit society still, as much as that's possible, and work towards that all the time. We have our shula and we have our camp, and we offer all kinds of cultural activities, and we also show up to protest, and we do campaigns, and we do a little bit of political lobbying here and there, and we do all kinds of stuff. And yeah, we try to be this home for the Jewish left in Canada.
But just, unlike a shul, in terms of like membership and doing some things that are fee-based, creating culture and our own internal society, like that is somewhat sometimes fee-based, it's really up to the individual to self-identify what someone can afford. And we don't ask questions, and we work on a bedrock principle that no one gets turned away. So there is a lot of effort and labor to meet people where they're at to the best of our ability. And we work in a not-for-profit context, and charitable context. So we're never working to create profit. We're just doing break-even model, right? And trying to create the cultural pieces to bring people together. And yeah, I just want to echo something that Shale brought up, which is when our elders really talk about the heyday, which I think we're returning to, by the way. There is a renaissance. But when our elders talk about the heyday, they're really like, our politics was our social life, and our social life was our politics. And those things could not be separated. And, it's sort of like socializing with purpose is socialism, right? Like, like that is definitely like an echoed sentiment.
We have been meeting with creating coalitions with like-minded Canadian Jewish organizations, and there are like-minded Jewish Canadian organizations, very strong ones. One of them is IJV, Independent Jewish Voices, which is like the sister organization of Jewish Voice for Peace. And I think one of the main thing that sets us apart, that makes us special or makes us autonomous in terms of lefty Jewish orgs, is that we have a kind of one-stop shopping thing, which is, yes, we are politically active. And especially in the last 2 years, there has been major focus, obviously, on Palestinian rights, Palestinian humanity, and that's something that we share with these organizations and internationally. But we also have, and it's very, very important, we have this humongous cultural element in a kind of Emma Goldman-derived idea that a revolution needs to have pleasure in it. And this has been intrinsic to our organization from the beginning. The focus on politics, the focus on liberationist politics, but also a focus on language, education, and cultural events. And we're doing cultural events like crazy all year in a way that I don't see a lot of organizations do, especially on the Jewish left. We're very proud of that. And it's something that is a major focus for us. Music, theater, everything. Film screenings, language courses. And we have rejuvenated, if you'll excuse the pun, the Toronto Jewish Folk Choir, which was a huge, important, internationally recognized institution. The Toronto Jewish Folk Choir, which was connected to the United Jewish People's Order, performed at Massey Hall, which is kind of Carnegie Hall. The Carnegie Hall of Toronto. It was massive. Thousands of people will come out to see the Toronto Jewish Folk Choir, and we would bring in guests like Paul Robeson, like the Met star Jan Pierce, this famous tenor. Like we had all. It was a huge thing, which is, and this sounds like a kind of fringe aspect of our organization, but it's not. I think it's intrinsic to our organization, and it really illustrates what we're about in a big way. Yeah.
Honestly, just as you talk about all these different offerings that the UJPO does or used to offer, it does remind me of like a late 19th century socialist party, where we read about these and it's like, I mean, Zach was kind of talking about with the Bund too, where these were full societies with having their own newspapers, sometimes multiple, their own trade unions, their own cultural organizations. I guess I'm kind of curious on that. What do you see in terms of, because labor is obviously very important. What do you see in terms of like, it came out of the workers' circle. What do you see in terms of labor politics within your organization today? Are there any specific stuff around encouraging unionization, encouraging other forms of left politics, beyond just like politics, but also the economic side of things, like in the future?
We've certainly had solidarity with unions and strikes and stuff. But I mean, I think you can point to a general breakdown in unionist activity across the board, Jewish or not.
Yeah.
But yeah, do you want to one
We
of you
have
can
an
maybe
official, like we have economic justice as an official one of our like activist priorities, but we don't have a strong we don't have a strong labor politic anymore in a really active way. But and I think it's partly because of like mainly because of what David's saying of just that not being that strong anywhere on the left. And also because, which is what happened to most leftist and like labor Jewish organizations, as Jews were upwardly mobile and became more affluent in general. You know, Jews in Toronto went from being factory workers to being middle class, and our membership is not a monolith, but generally much more middle class than it was at the beginning. And so that kills a lot of the labor organizing when people are not working class anymore. And it's a struggle. We definitely have that struggle to this day, and we're thinking about it a lot. And yeah, like how do we prioritize that? And also just be honest as an organization with who our membership is, and more awareness around like we do have this really middle class membership now, and what does that mean, and how can we be ethical with the resources that we actually have, and not just live in this like magical past where we were just happy factory workers and just pretend we still are instead of everyone coming to terms with the fact that like we're doctors and lawyers and whatever, and
priorities change.
When I say we, I don't mean me personally. I work at the United Jewish People's Order and not a lawyer, but yeah, it's different. And so how do we like recognize that? And yeah, that's a challenge for us now.
We have supported strike causes even since I've been on staff. I don't want to
totally,
but priorities have changed. Like we move with the times, and obviously Gaza has been at the forefront of our activism for the last 2 years. That's been a major focus. We also have pillars of our activism that we've maintained. We are queer positive. We are, we've mentioned economic justice. We've taught all these things. First Nations solidarity has been very strong in our community. But yes, over the past 2 years, there's been a lot of Palestinian activism and allyship.
I really like to look at like rather than just replicate, like we're not going back to the promise of in the 1920s when this organization was founded by Bolsheviks who were like, we are going to do communism and it's happening immediately and it's happening now and it's going to be amazing. Like we're not going back to that. But I really do think it's important to think about how truly radical those people were. Like they were not like, yeah, like I'm a left wing and I signed this petition. Like they were as radical as you get. And that's a huge, major inspiration to me and how I want us to exist now is like on the cutting edge of radical politics, what that means now, whatever that means, I want us to be there, not just kind of like peace and justice throughout the world and singing, like singing's great, but I'm like, we need to be on that cutting edge, just like our ancestors were, and they weren't afraid to be, and they were devoting their lives to very radical causes. And so that's how I draw the through line.
I think there's more that could be said and that we've said in the past that we'll see again regarding like what the relevance of the thought of Jewish labor organizing can be in the modern day. It's something that those of us involved with Bundesorganizing have to reckon with, because it's literally in the name, right? Like it's not a question that can be, it's not a question that can be ignored. Whatever the answer is, there should be something talked about. And I think there's relevance regarding, as you said, going with the times, and also realizing that, finishing university and doesn't necessarily like put you well into safety into the middle class, whatever the middle class may be, whether or not even being in the middle class guarantees, freedom from alienation under capitalism, and so on and so on.
And sorry, Zach, and just to say, I mean, from a Marxist standpoint, there's no such thing as the middle class. You're either a bourgeois or you're a proletarian, and it's based on your relationship to the means of production, not based on how big your bank account is.
Exactly. As you can be petty bourgeois, or you can be labor aristocracy. If you want to go all down that way. As I said, there's a lot more that could be said about it. But specifically, again, regarding some of the most recent activities that you've been doing, bearing in mind how involved you've been right now in like Palestine solidarity work, and also that you maintain important activity regarding youth education, I was interested to what extent the work that you've done and the work that you continue to do fills some of the gaps that we haven't seen too much coming from the American Jewish left, perhaps. And if it doesn't come from the American Jewish left, then in many cases it doesn't come from a lot of other places, because that's like where all the eyes are turned to a lot of the time. What I mean specifically is a subject that we covered a few episodes back regarding like Jewish youth education, and that there's a lot of criticism of mainstream Jewish communal institutions. They're considered Zionist, they're considered propagandistic. People say that the experience that they got through going in there was akin to brainwashing. Like, this is the sort of narrative that comes out from documentaries like Israelism. And, from my perspective, a lot of that can be like understood as true, or like for the perspective is valuable. At the same time, I think that, there should be more mobilization around parents in places where their kids participate in schools, or where they're going to exist anyway, or the creation of new schools with new curricula, new forms of teaching and developing the education of young Jews. And so I was wondering to what extent, with the resources that are limited to you, and just as they're limited to anyone, have you been attempting anything in this regard?
That's an MWS question, so let's put our MWS hats on, which is Morris Winchevsky Schools. So the Morris Winchevsky Schools, this is a secular social justice, humanist, Jewish education for children from the ages of KK, which we call Kinderkaper, so preschool, all the way to Bar Mitzvah age. We have had this school operating since 1928. Is that right? I think it's 19, right? So we have another 100th coming up, like in another 2 years. Like, it's never gonna end. And so at our school, we have this like living, breathing curriculum, and it's a beautiful document. A lot of it has to be credited to, Maxine Hermelin, who we've mentioned before, who poured her life into the Shoah. And then sort of in the recent history, in the last decade, we had an education director by the name of Leah Terechansky, who contemporized our curriculum and really put it through a settler colonial lens as an Israeli, right? And what that means. So now it's like, it's still continuing by our current education director. Now it's still continuing to be, refined and defined. it's incredible to see. I mean, David should talk about his experience too with his own children be mitzvahing in the program. Basically, what our be mitzvah program asks our eldest children to do, and we bring this offering to adults as well. We have an adult secular be mitzvah program. Is we ask each individual to find the path to their own Jewishness. So, what is the story to you? How is your personal narrative finding its way to your own Jewish heart and your own Jewish connectivity? And all of that is Jewish, right? So there's this like validation that even if you don't know the Parsha, you know what your root to your Jewishness is, right? It's a very, very can be a very profound project as a result from each individual. We have a ceremony. It's we have secular blessing. We do all kinds of things, and how the activism gets threaded in there is, through the curriculum, through when the kids move through the curriculum and they're asked to contend with, historical moments such as the Nakba, alongside historical moments such as the Holocaust. How does that all kind of come out, right? Like, what are they filtering? What are they processing? And then how does it come out to their own Jewish path? So I do think we're offering like a very beautiful, very unique product. And this year, for the first time, we're finally launching it outside of Toronto by offering a virtual Bar Mitzvah class for kids. And I hope that we can repeat that. We're piloting that now. So yeah, and we really hope that our Bar Mitzvah graduates are our future leaders. Like, we try to nurture and instill this idea that we want you to continue, and we consider you leaders because you've gone through this rigorous process and you've done this self-examination. So what can you bring to community, right? So we try to give opportunity to our young people and our adults who go through the program. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like to build on what Serena's saying, like I think something that's really special about MWS is that we do get, it is a Jewish education, it is secular, but they learn the Jewish stories, like they do, and in amongst that, we also they learn about Palestine, and they learn about the Nakba, and they also learn about settler colonialism in Canada on Turtle Island, but it's not defined by being anti-Zionist. It's more like that it's pluralistic, and there's so many ways to be Jewish, and it's very like it's so awesome to go to. We have like parties for Purim and Hanukkah and Sukkot and stuff for the kids, and it's such a nice environment to be in because it's just really celebratory. Like, I think for kids right now growing up in this moment, like how do you celebrate Jewishness when Jews are committing a genocide? And in a way that doesn't feel horrifying, and like obviously a lot of those kids' parents are contending with that, and we do provide the space where these kids can learn to celebrate their Jewishness and be proud of it and interested in it, and however they can come to it. And there's so many options, and there's so much pluralism of just like any way that you come to this is beautiful, and here's some learning, and we can be Jewish together, and we can be Jewish in this way that is not, violent towards another people. And it is, the whole curriculum is really rooted in like an anti-oppressive lens, but it's very loving, like a learning about Jewishness in this really loving way. It is a really hard thing to do right now, and I think we do that really well, and it's a special place for the kids and also for the parents and just for families to be in community with other parents who are raising their Jewish kids in this moment, and trying to figure out how to do that. And our Shula families are involved in Palestine solidarity, like Jewish Palestine solidarity activism within the TDSB, which is the Toronto District School Board. So they also have a group that does a lot of Palestine solidarity work with Palestinian families in general in Toronto schools, because of course there's all kinds of bad shit going on there. So yeah, I think it's just this celebratory element of it, while still being really rooted in social justice, is like what's so beautiful about NWS.
I think one thing that was just sort of touched on that points to elements of what our future is as an organization, as a multifaceted organization. What was touched on was the staunch secularism that we have, has always been part of our various permutations. I like to tell an anecdote about how when I used to teach at the shul, especially in the context of music, and I was once teaching the kids. It was always a challenge to find a song that the kids would enjoy singing, and there was this Yiddish song that where the chorus mentioned the "Since es beschaffen Himmel und Erd," since heaven and earth were created. And I was singing the song, and I was so excited because the kids were loving it. This is in the late 90s. The ED at the time comes in and says, David, she pulls me out of the class. She tells me I can't teach that song because it mentions heaven and earth and creation.
Oh my gosh.
So does the anthem of the Bund.
Yeah, I was about to say, doesn't the Bund anthem say Himmel und Erd?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. Well, does it say Beschaffen? Does it say creation of heaven and earth? Anyway,
it says the heavens and the earth will hear us.
Yeah. I can see how the problem here is creation. Anyway, whatever. The staunchness of the secularism was such that I was discouraged from teaching that song. So that's a long. There's a very long story to discuss where we come from. And what's happened is you look at our curriculum now, and they talk about the Talmud, and they talk about the Mishnah, and they tell the stories of Sarah and Rachel, whatever it is. You go through Torah, not Torah, but these stories as being intrinsic from a literary point of view to Jewish knowledge. This would have been unheard of decades ago. So my point is that there has been an evolution, and I think that this evolution is very important for us right now, because if you look at, for example, we can talk about this as a whole kettle of fish, as they say, but does the future of the Jewish left include more spirituality and religion? That's my first question, because that's when I meet young people, young lefties, young radical Jews, there's a lot of call for that. So that's something that we have to face as an organization. The other thing is our Yiddishism. That Yiddish has been intrinsic to our organization from the beginning. It still is. Yiddish songs, Yiddish language, Yiddish Ashkenazi-centric culture. And this is something we're facing as well, because there's more and more call for engaging with Ladino, engaging with, all the Mizrahi, all the different Jewish lineage. And that's something that also is becoming apparent. So that speaks to the future, and that speaks to our educational project as well.
Yeah, no, I think what you're saying here is really just true for the broader Jewish left as a whole, but arguably this is a lot longer of a story, because as far as I understand it, you look at the Jewish left of the late 19th century, early 20th century, and it is that staunch secularism, even anti-religious. This is where you get things like a Yom Kippur ball, where on Yom Kippur, the Jewish anarchists would have a massive feast and say, fuck you, God. Basically as a way of saying, like, we want to have a Jewish place where we can be Jewish, but also have nothing to do with the religious part of it.
Well, because religion was an oppressive structure.
Exactly. But from what what I understand is actually, I think, as early as the 1920s, which is funny because like that's when UJPO started, you start to see a shift away from that I understand as being rooted in like arguably this kind of loss of a secular Jewishness as like a widespread understanding, just because I think we talk about assimilation as a major part of that. And I think when I look at Jewish thinkers like Martin Buber, who is arguably like religious, spiritual, but is also still like a socialist leftist, you see this shift that I've understood as like perhaps as Jews stopped being able to have this easily accessible, just obvious mode of secular Jewishness, they started to find a religious spiritual Jewishness that could still be tied to this liberatory left-wing politics. And I'm seeing, I like have understood that history as something that's like arguably like over 100 years old at this point, of like kind of moving away from a secular Jewishness and towards a spiritual left-wing Jewishness. And I guess I'm kind of, we'll have only a few more questions, so I want to keep this one brief, but where do you see the place of your secular Jewish organization within the wider Jewish left, not even just Jewish left, the wider Jewish world in Toronto? Because there's not a lot of examples of organizations like that in a lot of places. And I guess when you are one of many Jewish organizations, and I assume you're probably the only one that is explicitly secular in this way, how do you kind of relate to the wider Jewish world in Toronto? And I'm sure there's all sorts of political disagreements that we could get into, but I'm just kind of curious how you guys situate yourself within the wider Jewish world where you are.
Can I make a quick answer? I know I just talked for 25 minutes. Can I just quickly, I would say two things. I would say that we, not in Toronto specific, but I would point you to the Jewish Currents podcast called On the Nose, which did this great episode last year about how Jewish Currents was starting to introduce Parsha readings into their I guess it'll appear in our emails today if you subscribe to Jewish Currents. Even from a taking the Torah portion of the week and putting it through a radical lens. And this podcast, it's like it gets pretty nasty. You have the old guard of the Jewish Current saying, "You've betrayed us. How dare you even talk about, so there's so Jewish Currents is another secular lefty radical organization that we have a strong affinity with. But you're right, there aren't that many. I think this points to the fact that because religion has a very different, much less oppressive lens for people, religion tied to Zionism is a whole other world. But just religion itself and spirituality doesn't have the same connotations. I'll say it again, that we look at young people, I'll include Shale in this, there is a hunger for being okay with religious Jewishness tied to liberationist radical politics. And that's something that we have to face. And because we are not that. I'm not that personally. I come from that world of rejecting religion. But that's not the future, perhaps.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to cut out the promotion of the Jewish Currents podcast. We will not tolerate competing narratives over here.
He's joking.
I am.
I wasn't promoting, was I?
Yes, I am actually joking. No.
I also listen to On the Nose, so like guilty as charged.
So no, but we've talked quite a bit about the past and the current activities, models of Jewish left organizing.
The future? Yeah.
Some of the like aspects of spirituality. I think that the question around secularism and the Jewish left is one that requires significant nuance, because after all, secular doesn't mean atheistic, right? And so there's
Yes.
lots more that could be done regarding that. Like, religious education is not religious catechism, to use a non-Jewish term. But we've passed a little bit past the hour mark, and so I wanted to give our three guests the opportunity to make any sort of final points just before we finish off, if there's anything that we haven't covered yet, or something that you'd like to reference that we did cover, and just to get the final word as a final courtesy for coming on and being such great guests.
I do have a cute anecdote about that. I think points back to an earlier question you asked, Zach, where like how do the politics play out, and where does it all fit in? And is it culture? Is it politics? Is it spirituality? Is it secularism? Like, I think it maybe touches on all these themes. We had one of our cohort adult secular bar mitzvah graduates approach us recently and suggest that we offer a needleworker circle together, right? So this graduate also works at the Textile Museum of Canada here in Toronto. And so together, the Textile Museum and UJPO got together to offer a 6-class needleworker circle where we all get together to stitch and learn stitching technique. But more than that, we get together and we talk about the Jewish labor movement, where, the Jews of there's so much historical information at the museum too, about, the garment workers' strikes and the garment worker factories and how the women were getting together and creating incredible opportunities for, the working class, from this factory context. And it's such a pleasure to be productively engaging, intellectually conversing, and artistically communicating with each other all at the same time at the circle. And it's one of those moments where, we're all a staff of UJPO. We're so thrilled. One of our graduates comes to us with an idea like this. We're just there is only yes in our future, right? So, when we also think about wanting to galvanize the left and keep ourselves from being splintered from one another and build coalition, it's through all of these entry points, right? And this is just why I love my job, pretty much.
That sounds really exciting. It's also cool because it's in a real way. Sorry to cut you off. We have more to say, but in a real way, the garment industry was the industry of Jewish immigrants in the late 19th century, and it wasn't just women; it was full families that would be doing that work.
But yeah.
So it's really, I think, kind of special to be doing that kind of work. That's really cool that you had a graduate of your program bring that to you guys and make it happen. That's really special.
Daryl, why do you love your job?
I feel like I said all the things I need to say. And then my brain is shutting down also.
It's Shabbos brain.
Yeah, exactly.
That second soul is entering your body, and that means you can't do work anymore.
Exactly. I need to figure out what to do because my fridge is broken.
Oh, I hate that.
Yeah.
A broken fridge?
I had that.
I have to cook with some random things because they're all going bad. Anyways.
Does anyone have advice on what to do when your fridge door doesn't close? Can you install a hinge on it or something with doors?
I would put a heavy object against it.
Yeah.
Okay, no, but this is serious business. It's been bothering me for a while. I constantly get told that I leave the fridge door open, but it's just I don't want to slam it. I'm sorry.
Ridiculous.
I have to say also that I'm very inspired by the two of you, Zach and Ben, and this connection that you've really pursued, even though we've been really hard to get. We've played hard to get. And I appreciate that. I appreciate so much. You're very knowledgeable. You're asking such interesting questions, and next time it's your turn, we're going to put you on the hot seat, right? We're going to podcast. Yeah.
Please do. We didn't even get into half the things I wanted to talk about. I'll just say that.
Because we talk too much, we blabber.
David, did you have anything you wanted to say as any last remarks?
There's a joke.
Please.
Stalin is making a speech in front of the huddled masses. 100,000 people. And he says, I have here a letter from Leon Trotsky. It says, you were wrong, I was right. Or, sorry, I was wrong, you were right, I should apologize. Everyone cheers, except this little Jewish man in the front row. He says, excuse me, Comrade Stalin. He says, yes, old man, you're reading it wrong. Stalin says, you dare to defy me, old man, as if this would ever happen. He says, get up here and read how you think it should be read. And the old man says, thank you. And he gets up and he takes the letter and he says, I was wrong. You were right. I should apologize.
David, I really love your nasally like Litvish voice when you said that.
I like first Stalin was
Jews
like,
are nasal and annoying. That's the way it goes. Yeah.
when you started
what did
out
you-
with Stalin, he was like this, like, and then he turned into like the Lord of the Rings. Like I feel like this, and it was like he was like Sauron.
I'm a man of many voices. I'm a man of many talents and many voices.
Ever since
my goodness.
I've watched The Death of Stalin, I can't imagine anybody doing an accent other than the one that the guy did. I don't even know what accent it is. It's like Welsh or something. I don't know. But it's
That's
really
a funny.
great.
That's a good movie. That's a good movie.
It's an
I like
amazing
that.
movie. It's an amazing.
Did you guys
Honestly-
watch that? The Death of Stalin?
I've watched it so many times. Simon Russell Beale is such an amazing actor.
I was talking to my colleagues. Have you guys seen that? It's very good. Anyway, whatever.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. The guy who plays Barrio is amazing. This has
Honestly-
happened. Yeah.
Honestly, we could. I could talk. I think it'd be so fun to do a whole nother episode just on UJPO's communism and talk about the history of the communism of your organization and the Bundism and the contradictions or lack thereof within the communism and the Bundism of your organization. Really, really interested in all of the politics and the history, and it sounds like maybe we should see. I don't know that
We
the
should get
writer.
Esther on here.
I was about to say, I was
We should
going to see
get
if we
Esther.
can find Esther Ryder to have her on to talk about the history
Talk about
more
motorcycles, yeah.
extensively.
You should get her cousin on as the speaker.
You're
She's
so
a very
funny,
good
Zach.
storyteller.
I'm sorry.
Writer,
sorry.
speaker.
Not
I'm
as good of
sorry.
a joke as David gave. So,
No, I'm
Oh, thanks
I
for
also
lying.
just-
Thanks for lying.
hey, I'm fully real. I think you guys are really fun. Maybe I'll see if I can come up for the Centennial, which you said is on June 11th. Listeners,
Starring
be here.
Naomi Klein.
Starring
We're bringing
Naomi
Naomi
Klein. Wow, that's very exciting. Yeah, I saw on your Instagram you had a letter from Naomi Klein. So, can I ask what the connection is there? Has Naomi Klein been involved or just familiar with you guys?
Should I do full disclosure here, or? Well, I mean, first of all, she thinks we're amazing because and her family has been very involved. They have cottages at our camp, and I'm old friends with her husband, Avi Lewis, grandson of, and my wife is very good friends with her. But anyway, so there's
I also-
multiple connections.
But I also think you guys should just know about, because it will be what will be zoomed. While I was resistant about the June 11th zooming, we have a third Seder. Do you guys
Yeah.
know about the third Seder, like the tradition of third Seders? So third Seders
That's
are,
important.
yeah, the third Seder is a politicized Seder, right? Well, Shale says it better than I do, but like that, the tradition of it comes from the turn of the century, when after we had our personal Seders, we would come together as chosen family and community and specifically talk about a liberation, using liberation as an analogy for the present moment, and not just a revisiting of, the Egyptian tale. So we do that. We've been doing that at UJPO for over 75 years. And it is probably the annual landmark event of our organization. And we are hosting one, of course, again on April the 4th. And a link to this event can be found on our Instagram. And yeah, you should zoom in or come.
Yeah, it's zoomed. It's there's a virtual version. Yeah.
We'll put it in our description. Let's go there and
There will be
see
Yiddish.
how we.
There will be Yiddish.
There will be
Ooh.
Yiddish. Is that a threat?
Be careful.
Yeah,
yourselves.
watch out how you say that. There will be Yiddish.
Yiddish?
David, Serena, Shale, it's been really great to chat with you guys, and I hope we get to do it again sometime.
Yeah, thank you. You guys are
Thank
great.
you. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
I love how international this is.
Good
I
Shabbos.
love how
Good
international.
Shabbos.
Yeah, good Shabbos.
Stop it.
say